Our second story tonight, Ralph Nader. Now, I've talked about him often on this show, and I've been wanting to do this for a while. So I have two clips from Ralph Nader that I want to show you. The first one I'm going to show you is an interview that he did with Jesse Ventura. There's a question that he asked him that I want you to pay close attention to. Because long story short, Ralph Nader warned us a long time ago. So I want you to hear something he says in this interview with Jesse Ventura. Listen to the question that Jesse asked him here.
Couple closing questions, Ralph. What was the last lawsuit you won?
The last lawsuit I won, I've lost a lot of lawsuits trying to stay on the ballot. The Democrats hire these big law firms to knock us off one state ballot after another. And for 10 years, they've been not preventing us from even arguing on the merits and making us pay their costs. So I haven't won one in a long time.
And that was the Democrats did that to you?
Yeah, they hired this law firm, Reed Smith, a giant law firm out of Pittsburgh, and they made me pay, although I'm still contesting it, $82,000 because they bounced me off the ballot in a very, very unethical way. And they had nice judges who they gave money to, campaign contributions. Just go to centerforcompetitive.democracy.org and you'll see some of the information of how people in this country of ours are blocked from becoming candidates to giving voters choice. I don't call that a democracy. The young people who watch your show, Jesse, they have got to stop being indifferent. They got to get engaged. I have young people saying, oh, I'm not turned on to politics. And I say, you're not turned on to politics? Look at human history. When you're not turned on to politics, politics turns on you. And this.
Yes. Now, I'm going to continue this, but let's go back and hear this one more time because I want you to pay close attention to what he said the Democratic Party did to him, how they kicked him off the ballot. And I've said this before. I don't know why people want to go into this party. Listen to this.
The giant law firm out of Pittsburgh, and they made me pay, although I'm still contesting it, $82,000 because they bounced me off the ballot in a very, very unethical way. And
this is why I say we don't really have a true democracy in this country. The fact that you have a party that can just kick people off of the ballot just because you're not running through the two-party system, that's not a true democracy. So when you have the Biden administration, you have other Democrats preaching for voting rights, wanting people to have voting rights. They're not talking about voting for just anybody. They want you to have the right to vote for Democrats. And Democratic Party is just as guilty of gerrymandering as the Republican Party. That's not just a Republican thing. Although if you only watch CNN, if you only watch MSNBC, you will hear them say time and time again, who is it? Stacey Abrams? Who is it? Al Sharpton? Who is it? Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, anyone that they talk to from this current administration will come on and they will tell you that we have to get the voting rights bill passed because the Republican Party is redrawing the districts so that Black people's votes won't count towards what? Towards the Democratic Party. What they don't tell you is that they do the same thing. It's not just the Republicans. So we don't have a democracy. So when you see politicians get up and make these speeches, and a lot of them have been bringing this up recently because it's midterm year, give these speeches and they get up there and they say, we have to protect our democracy. What democracy? We don't have one. People's votes aren't even protected right now. We don't have election integrity in this country. And I think the sooner more people understand that, the better off people will be. Listen to this.
They had nice judges who they gave money to, campaign contributions. Just go to centerforcompetitive.democracy.org.
Buying off judges.
And you'll see some of the information of how people in this country of ours are blocked from becoming candidates to giving voters choice. I don't call that a democracy. The young people who watch your show, Jesse, they have got to stop being indifferent. They got to get engaged. I have young people saying, oh, I'm not turned on to politics. And I say, you're not turned on to politics? Look at human history. When you're not turned on to politics, politics turns on you. And in this country, we got a Wall Street-Washington alliance. That's why my book is to challenge the Wall Street-Washington alliance, Unstoppable, the emerging left-right alliance to dismantle the corporate state, which the right wing calls crony capitalism. They don't like it either.
It's interesting, too, when you talk about how you want to run for office and how the Democrats and Republicans pretend to tell the people how good it is, and yet they block people like you from having any opportunity or whatever to get a message out there. They go to like they did to you, hiring these big highfalutin lawyers to get you thrown off the ballot. How can they possibly, after doing things like that, stand out there with a straight face and talk about that they stand for what American values are? How do they do it, Ralph?
Well, I'm going to let Ralph answer that question, but also I'm going to answer it too, because they're paid liars. They're liars. A lot of the politicians that we have in DC, they're former lawyers. A lot of them are. I remember when I was in undergrad, I took the LSATs. I don't know if I ever told you guys this, but I took the LSATs. It was a thing. Law school was a backup plan. I'm not even going to lie. Like, it was just a backup plan. I don't know if this don't work out. Let me go ahead and take these LSATs. If I get into law school, that'll be my backup plan, because you can do other things with a Juris Doctorate, not just become a lawyer, right? So a friend of mine told me one time when I was told her I was studying for the LSATs and I was going to take them, and she said, oh, so you want to be a liar? And I was like, what? No, I said, it's a backup plan. If I don't get a job like I'm supposed to, or hoping with the economy was in the pits back then too. If I don't get a job lined up right out of college, at least I have law school that I can probably fall back on. And she said, yeah, so you want to be a liar, because that's what lawyers are. Hit me right there. Hit me right there. Didn't end up going to law school because I did shadow. You could shadow lawyers back then. I don't know if they still let people do this, but I did shadow an attorney for a week. It was not what I thought it was going to be. I looked at law school as like being in the courtroom. That's where a lot of people want to be, like actually trying cases. I shadowed this lawyer for an entire week. All she did was paperwork from dusk till dawn. Paperwork, paper. When are we going to go in the courtroom? When are we going to go into? She's like, oh, that's rare. Most of what I do is paperwork. Needless to say, Sabby did not go to law school. Sabby went to grad school instead. But let's let Ralph answer that question.
They got a forked tongue and they lie. They wrote the laws that keep us off the ballot, the Republicans, Democrats, in the state legislature. It's a terrible situation, and we got to break it. Now, I did win a lot of lawsuits in 2000 and 2004, places like Arizona.
I just want to pause here and echo what he said. He just told you they wrote the law that allows them to kick you off the ballot. This is why I tell people the game is rigged. Now, there's a gentleman who's running in AOC's district. I'm going to try to see if I can get him on. Jonathan... forgot his last name, but Jonathan, who's running, I think it's Jonathan Lowe, was running in AOC's district. He just got kicked off the ballot. And he was running as a independent, I believe. I don't think he was a Green. I think he was independent. They just kicked him off the ballot. This is why I said we don't have a democracy.
Various states, for example. But overall, they just overwhelmed us. How about this? In 12 weeks, in the summer of 2004, when I was running for president, they filed 24 lawsuits in 12 weeks in 24 states against us. We don't have the lawyers to handle that. There's no Western country that obstructs people from voting and obstructs third-party candidates from getting on the ballot like the USA. Shame.
Nope, it's just us. It's just this country.
Shame on these two parties. They've got to be toppled and replaced.
And Ralph, I'll top that. Where the hell is our mainstream media on this?
they're swimming downstream.
Exactly. I mean, why aren't they reporting on things like that, where they're doing everything in their power to stop a citizen like you from seeking political office? And I know that I would run into the same opposition if I run in 2016. Do you foresee anything different in my case, Ralph?
Yeah.
If I did it?
Yeah.
Would they do the same thing to me?
Yeah, because the ballot access laws, some of them have been declared unconstitutional in parts. It's a little easier, fewer numbers of signatures on petitions in a number of states. It's getting a little better and better, but that doesn't take it away from what the damage to democracy. You know, I was supporting a majoritarian issues. Majority wanted me on the debates, for example, including a Fox poll. I was supporting single payer, full Medicare for all, which Americans have wanted since the days of President Harry Truman.
Oh, and I just want to add something really quick here. And I want to go ahead and let you know, I truly believe that if Bernie Sanders would have ran as an independent or a green, the Democratic Party would have done the same thing to Bernie Sanders that they did to Ralph Nader. I truly believe that. And I think Bernie Sanders believes that too. That's why he ran through the Democratic Party.
My website, I kept it open now for 6 years, votenader.org. You'll see 18 agendas that are supported by the majority of the American people, and I can't even get on the ballot in order to appeal for their votes. That's a definition of tyranny.
It completely is. And until the people of this country wake up to that, Ralph, you and I are going to have to scream and holler about it, aren't we?
Yeah, and you'll get a lot of pro bono lawyers in one state after another fighting to get you on the ballot, Jesse. Don't worry about that.
Ralph, let me ask you this. How would you describe your political philosophy?
Simple.
This one's good.
I seek justice for all. I don't like to label myself. I'm a justice seeker. I want safer cars for everyone, whether they're conservative or liberal. I want a health care that's open to everyone, whether they're conservative or liberal, red state, blue state. I don't like empire. I don't like bloated military budgets and corporate welfare budgets when we should be building bridges, highways, schools, sewage, water systems, renovating, repairing America, producing good paying jobs in every community that can't be shipped off to China.
Ralph, I'll tell you what, if I run, I'm going to get you as one of my major speech writers. There's no doubt about it, because you're damn good at it. You know your stuff.
All right. So that's the first clip. And you notice what Ralph Nader said. He's not looking for certain things for people on the left or the right. He wants justice for all. He wanted everyone to be treated equally. He wants everyone to have health care. He wants everyone to have better infrastructure. And that is a threat to the two-party system. Because at the end of the day, let's be real. When you have a Democratic candidate, they're fighting and running on the issues that the Democratic Party wants. When you have a Republican candidate, they're fighting and running on the issues that the Republican Party wants. But when you have a candidate that is independent or is green, third party, they're running on the issues that the majority of Americans, especially those who are working class and poor, want in this country. And that's something that both the Republicans and the Democrats, they do not frame it that way. And they don't frame it that way on purpose, because if they frame it that way, then more Americans will wake up to the fact that both of these parties are the same. Both of these parties are corporate. Both of these parties are corrupt. They don't want you to see that it's really about a class issue. They want you to still think that it's about left versus right. Now you have Republicans calling the Democratic Party, the Biden administration, these far left socialists. Obviously, people don't know the definition of socialism. And most people are not going to look it up and do their own research. Then you have the Democratic Party calling the Republican Party these crazy, racist, far right wingers. Is everybody that's a Republican that way? No, they're not. And at the end of the day, they keep us divided. They hold our attention on that division so that we're not paying attention to the real issue, which is class. And it's not just those two parties that do it. Mainstream media does it. Hollywood does it. Sports entertainment does it. They even have sports announcers giving their political opinions now too. It's all around us. And this is why independent media is incredibly important. Now, that interview with Jesse, that was from 2014. I mean, you look on YouTube for Ralph Nader, he goes far back, far back. Ralph Nader also fought against General Motors. I don't know if everyone knows about that. And he's going to talk about that in this next clip. Now, this interview was from 2019, and it's called How to Fix Democracy. This is on the Bertelsmann Foundation channel. I want you to listen to what he says in this interview. Again, we're talking about democracy here.
So what's happened in those 30 years? You sort of you exploded in American life in the mid-1960s with your still important book on Safe at Any Speed. Since 1965, which is more than 50 years, how has American democracy, quote unquote, degenerated?
Because the plutocrats and their oligarchs in Washington have learned how to block the gates to democratic achievement. For example, they've taken over Congress more than ever. And we could never have achieved what we did in the 60s and 70s if we had the Congress that occurs now, which is indentured to Wall Street, to big money, to gerrymandering, predictable elections for the most case, safe districts, lack of...
Let's hear that again. He's telling you about the difference between politics back in the 60s versus today. And he brings up the money. And this is why I always continue to go back to the money issue when it comes to this two-party system. Notice he explains how he was able to fight against GM. So listen to this.
Achievement. For example, they've taken over Congress more than ever. And we could never have achieved what we did in the 60s and 70s if we had the Congress that occurs now, which is indentured to Wall Street, to big money, to gerrymandering, predictable elections for...
They should have never let big money come in. They should have never let big money come into politics. Now, people that go into Congress, they're less likely to implement change for the people because it's all controlled by Wall Street.
The most case, safe districts, lack of competition.
Didn't you have plutocrats in the 1960s? You had very wealthy Americans, the kind of people who may have owned the car companies or the banks back then?
They weren't as organized. They didn't have political action committees. When I took on GM, they didn't even have a lobbying office in Washington, D.C.
See, back then, like he said, they weren't as organized. They didn't have political action committees. We called them PACs. They didn't have that back then. That's how he was able to fight back and push back against General Motors. It's much harder to do it now. Now you would need that kind of fight from people on the outside, people not in DC, people who work at General Motors, activists. That's where you would need that pressure to come from, because the people in Congress and the Senate, they've been bought and paid for. They know GM is footing some of their donations. So they're not going to be the ones to fight against them for you. This is the big difference. This is why something like Citizens United should have never happened. And why are we not fighting against that? That seemed to be more of a thing back when Bernie Sanders was running. We have to push back against Citizens United. Now that there's no campaign, it seems like people just forgot about it. We don't need to talk about it anymore. No, this is still an issue. The money is still a problem. Go ahead and hit that like button for me, guys. That really does help me with the algorithm. So smash that like button if you can do so. Thank you very much. And let's go ahead and continue on here.
Now they're much more organized, and it teaches us a lesson. When we beat them, they come back even stronger if we don't become more organized. Democracy is all about civic organization. It's not just public opinion. That's important as a brooding omnipresence, signaling to the lawmakers that the bulk of the people are behind the few activists that are in the vanguard.
But Ralph, isn't that democracy? People organize, the poor organize, you're trying to organize the poor, the working class. The rich also have a right to organize.
They have a right to organize, but they don't have a right to rig the system so others cannot organize and confront them.
How are they rigging the system?
Well, look, we have voter suppression in this country, all kinds of obstacles which tend to keep out minorities and other dissident groups from being able to vote. We have gerrymandering where the politicians pick their voters. Can you imagine?
1 second here. Let's go back to the interviewer here when he asked the question, how are they rigging the system? But also the statement that he makes, the rich are allowed to organize too. Don't you just love when people just, there's always that one person that just throws that kind of in there. Like, what about this group? What about that group? We're not talking about that group right now. He's talking about working class and poor people in this country and how we don't have the rights that we should have. He has to throw in, well, rich people should be able to organize too. How often do rich people need to organize though? For the most part, our society works well for them. For the most part, it's the wealthy people that benefit from the structures, from the systems that we have in this country. How often do they really need to organize and fight for something? So listen to it.
Lawmakers that the bulk of the people are behind the few activists that are in the vanguard.
But Ralph, isn't that democracy? People organize, the poor organize, you're trying to organize the poor, the working class. The rich also have a right to organize.
They have a right to organize, but they don't have a right to rig the system so others cannot organize and confront them.
How are they rigging the system?
Well, look, we have voter suppression in this country, all kinds of obstacles which tend to keep out minorities and other dissident groups from being able to vote. We have gerrymandering where the politicians pick their voters. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
Whether it's Democrat Party or Republican Party, whoever's in control of the state government. We have very sophisticated, undisclosed campaign cash contributions now. We have a system that intimidates a lot of people from running for election because it's such a dirty system that.
Oh, not intimidation. Oh, yes, it happens. But again, that's why I say we don't have a true democracy. It's not a fair game.
It's exposed to slander and to libel and to all kinds of obstacles just to get on the ballot.
Some of the other people, Ralph, we've spoken to in this series, Earl Lewis, for example, or Carol Anderson, they, I think, reflect your argument, but rather than thinking in economic terms, they think in racial or cultural terms. Are you convinced that the big problem is money rather than race in American democracy?
They're connected, obviously, but class matters.
What was that? Let's bring it back in, because this is something we say a lot over at RBN. They're connected. Listen to this. Let's bring it back here. Here we go.
Convinced that the big problem is money rather than race in American democracy?
They're connected, obviously, but class matters more than race matters because it's class that pigeonholes people by stereotypes. And so the important thing to recognize in this country is if you look at all the gateways to democratic participation, democratic achievement, the plutocrats and the oligarchs have brilliantly gamed them to obstruct them. Look how they control consumers through fine print contracts. Look how they control small taxpayers by having a tax system that provides escapes and immunities and loopholes for the rich.
The system is designed to benefit wealthy people. It's not designed to benefit working class people, poor people. And honestly, nowadays, it's not really designed to benefit middle class people either. That's a big part of the problem. This is why I always bring it back to the class issue. Now, that's not to say that racism doesn't exist. I talk about race on the show as well, but it is the class issue that holds the majority of us back.
rich and the corporate. Look how they've done with the workers by weakening the labor laws to a level below any Western country in terms of interfering with the ability of workers to join unions and have collective bargaining against very organized giant employers like Walmart.
So, Ralph, do you think that the politics of identity, of gender, of race, do you think that's a bit of a red herring? Should people, organizers, when they're thinking about reforming American democracy, should they be thinking primarily about reforming the economic system rather than the cultural system?
Yes, because
That's a good question. Should we be thinking about reforming the economic system rather than the cultural system? Now, listen to his response with this. Go back just a teeny bit. All right.
Primarily about reforming the economic system rather than the cultural system.
yes, because reforming the economic system requires reforming the political system. For example, if you want a higher minimum wage, you have to go through Congress or state legislatures, by and large. If you want full Medicare for all with free choice of doctor and hospital, you have to go through Congress. If you want to crack down on the ripoffs by corporations of consumers in all kinds of ways, you have to go through the political gateways. So they go together. That's why we like to use the word political economy.
Ralph, what would you make of the different responses of the working class to what one might call the crisis in American democracy, or certainly the crisis of the American middle class? How would you make sense of the white working class affection for Trump and this shift to populism?
That's another good question. And I do want to add, someone was asking, I think it's Sweary Fairy. Did you ask, when was this interview? This was 2019. So this was before, actually, right before the pandemic. This was right before the pandemic. So keep that in mind. And again, this goes to show you these economic issues were already a problem. The pandemic pulled the cover off, so to speak. But these economic issues were already a problem for people, especially for people who are working class and poor. So listen to how he answers this question.
By developing an agenda that does not stratify people and produce alienation among African Americans or urban poor white Americans. That's why we have to have a broad agenda that says, look, all of you, regardless of your identity, are being underpaid, you're being underinsured, you're being disrespected, you're being excluded, you're being taken away from your own property, like the public airwaves, like the public lands, like the public pensions, which own huge stock on the New York Stock Exchange, but it doesn't control any of these corporations.
Are we in need, Ralph, and this is obviously a sensitive subject for you, are we?
We're all being exploited. All of us. If we're not a part of the elites, we're all being exploited. We're just worker bees to them. That's it. That's it. That's why some of these companies can treat their employees so poorly. That's why they can overwork people. That's why you have people in this country working 60 hours a week and still not making enough money to really get by, let alone get ahead. That's why. And they're afraid that people are going to realize that. More people are going to realize that. That's why Chris Small's unionizing Amazon. That's why that's such a big threat, right? Because they don't want workers to realize, wait a minute, we should have rights. Wait a minute, we should actually be paid a decent wage. Wait a minute, we should actually get paid leave. They don't want people to realize that. And if you talk to people from other countries and you tell them how it works here in the United States, when I talk to people who I know that are still in Germany, when I talk to people who I know that live in the UK, and I tell them about how you're not guaranteed to have these benefits in this country, depending on who you work for, they laugh because it doesn't make any sense. They look at me and they say, how does your country not want to take care of its own people? Greed. That's why.
In need of a new political party? Can the current political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, are they able to respond to this crisis? Or do we need a third party candidate?
We need a third and fourth and fifth party. We have to have a competitive democracy that gives more voices and choices to the voters. Because otherwise you get millions of voters voting for a terrible candidate because they can't stand the other candidate. Namely, they'll vote for Trump because they couldn't stand Hillary Clinton. And in order for that to work, what you have to do is get rid of the winner-take-all system. You got to get rid and replace it with proportional representation. You got to get rid of money nullifying votes and campaigns. You got to get rid of gerrymandering. And above all, on a presidential level, you got to get rid of the Electoral College. We're a laughing stock of the world, where people can run for president, win the popular vote, and lose the office in the White House, as has happened in 2000 campaign and 2016 campaign to the Democrats.
So you bring up the 2000 campaign, which of course you were involved in as a third party candidate. Some Democrats still haven't forgiven you for that. It's all very well, they might say, well, it's all very well talking about reforming the system.
Did you hear what he just said? Some Democrats still haven't forgiven you for that. Isn't that a damn shame? Isn't that a shame that you may have to apologize for running? What?
But in an unreformed system, isn't it irresponsible for third party candidates to run?
Not if the major parties adopt their agenda. These are third-party candidates who want more civil liberties, more civil rights, living wage, full health insurance, very mundane changes in livelihood, however important they are, that Western European countries and Canada have had for years. For years, there's no paid vacation for all workers in this country, unless you belong to a union that's negotiated it. In Sweden, they have 7 weeks paid vacation. In France, they have at least 4 weeks paid vacation. Are they smarter than we are? No, they have a parliamentary system that's more fluid and more leveraged for small party agendas to steer the larger parties in the direction of the people's interests.
Ralph, you've presented American democracy as being in crisis, and you're suggesting that they should adopt the European model. But we've had a similar kind of, some people would at least argue, a similar kind of corruption of democracy in Europe, the rise of populism and racism and xenophobia. Do you think you're a little idealistic about democracy in Europe, or do you believe?
It's always interesting to me when people say, like this past couple of years since Trump, when people say the rise of racism, as if racism just became a thing, as if we didn't have racism before. That's just always interesting to me. I'm like, do you not realize the world that some of us have been living in? The rise of racism. Oh boy. Oh boy.
That really the real problem with democracy is the American system, as opposed to the general state of democracy, at least in Western Europe?
Well, democracies produce in moments of time. They have to be refurbished. And you had a moment in time in Western Europe after World War II when you laid the basis for the social democratic state and the safety net. But it wasn't sufficiently refurbished. Why? Because the mass of the people take these advances for granted. And they don't get engaged from the local to the national level. They're not vigilant. They're not watchdogs. And so it isn't so much the system. You can have our system. You can have your system. It's the engagement that's absolutely key. For example, we're supposed to have the right to vote. You're supposed to have the right to vote. But the actual voting process is obstructed differently in different countries because the people allow it to happen.
Ralph, How to Fix Democracy. I'm going to give a reference to your new book, How the Rats Reformed the Congress.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. But yes, this interview took place in 2019, October 25th, 2019. Again, this was right before the pandemic. So as I've been saying to people before, these problems already existed. They were already issues. And Ralph Nader tried to warn us. There's so many more videos. I couldn't do all of them on here because you'd be with me all night. But there's so many videos from Ralph Nader. This is going all the way back to the 70s, where he was trying to warn people about the system. Thank you for the super chat, AJF. Noam Chomsky and Ralph Nader deserve to get the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Thank you so much for that super chat. Thank you for the super chat, Cryptician. Capitalism is not democracy. They cannot exist together at the same time. Capitalism is a routine attack against democracy. Thank you so much for that, Cryptician. Well said. Cryptician also said what Ralph Nader is saying right now is very important to know and remember about our current situation right now. Exactly, Cryptician. That's why I wanted to do this story tonight. I was like, oh my God, these videos were a couple years ago, but they are very present issues right now. And thank you for this super chat, Cryptician. Revolutionary Blackout Network is much more than a social media show. It's also every bit as much of a movement and activist organization too. Thank you so much for that, Cryptician. I really appreciate it.